안녕하세요, 연어입니다. 오늘은 캔디스 오웬스 쇼 에피소드 중에 제가 가장 좋아하는 에피소드를 번역해왔어요. 사실 제가 웬만하면 인트로를 잘 안 하긴 하는데요. 오늘은 영상이 좀 길기는 하지만 정말 중요한 내용이 될 것 같아서 이렇게 인트로까지 만들게 됐습니다. 받아들이기는 조금 어려운 내용이 될 수 있지만 우리가 결코 지나쳐서는 안 되는 내용이라는 걸 꼭 강조하고 싶어요. 이 영상의 주인공은 팀 발라드, Operation Underground Railroad라는 전 세계의 인신매매범들을 잡아들이고 인신매매 피해자들을 구해주는 참 귀한 단체입니다. 이 단체 덕분에 매년 수천 명의 피해자들이 구조됩니다. 그리고 수백 명의 범죄자들이 잡힙니다. 자, 그럼 그분의 이야기를 직접 한번 들어보실까요?
In the wake of 9/11, I jumped over. In fact, I was still, even before the name Homeland Security came out, I was already going into what was called the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was ICE. Okay, so, which, by the way, ICE does more than any other agency in the world to knock out pedophiles, so because I know that's been a topic and people want to get rid of ICE. That's insane to me.
Absolute insanity.
But anyway, so I worked under ICE. It was the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. And I went down on the border to combat terrorism. And I was there for only 6 months. I had the office I wanted, and I looked into Mexico from my office. We were crawling under tunnels. We were finding all those tunnels during this time. This was the early 2000s. And we were, doing what I wanted to do. And my boss called me in and he said, "Hey, we've selected you to help us start this new group, an anti-child trafficking group." And I literally, like most of my colleagues and even the world, what's child trafficking? What are you talking about? No one was talking about it then. And it turns out it's the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world.
All right, Tim, I'm going to cut you off and tell you that. I was ignorant even about that fact. So the fastest growing enterprise in the world is child sex trafficking.
Fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world is the selling of people.
Wow.
Yep. 30 million people are enslaved. About 8 million children are enslaved, whether it's sex slavery, slave labor, or organ harvesting, which is something we are working on mostly in the Middle East right now.
Okay, I don't think the majority of Americans know that information.
They do not know that.
That is incredible. No. Okay, so you get that call, you didn't know what it was, and you say, hey, you're now going to be the guy that's working on that. What next? So we start working these cases, and I was scared to death. I said no at first. I went back to my wife, and I said, "Can you believe they asked me to work this?" And we had little children at the time, and she says, "There's no way you're doing this. You'll bring darkness into our house." I said, "Yeah." So I went. I was preparing my speech to tell my boss no. He's a big, burly guy. I was scared of him. He had this big hook mustache, and I had to go tell him no. And I didn't want to do that. And I remember kind of rehearsing my speech in the mirror that next morning. Let's hear it.
And it was.
Let's hear it.
I
know you know it.
I never figured it out.
Okay.
I never got it out. I didn't have to. And it was a really sweet story. My wife came into the bathroom and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, "I'm wrong. We're wrong. You have to do this." For the very reason that we thought you couldn't do this because we have kids is the reason you have to say yes. And so my speech became easy. It was just yes. And we started in, and it was 100 times worse than I could have even perceived in my mind. The things that people do to children. And these are young children. People think we're talking about child pornography or child trafficking. They think 16, 17, and certainly those are technically minors. That's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. What people are doing to these children. In the last couple of years, there's been a 5,000% increase in child rape videos on the internet. And these are little children who are being abused this way. So I got into it. We started working it. There was 2 cases, one in Colombia and one in Haiti. Like I said, I learned about this little boy. His name is Gardy. In fact, I wear his name on my wrist. This little boy, Gardy, was a U.S. citizen, is a U.S. citizen, kidnapped in Haiti, living in Haiti with his family. He's of Haitian descent. And he was kidnapped from the church where his father was the pastor, and kidnapped and trafficked. Haiti's I think number 3 per capita in the world for human trafficking. And I promised this father that we would never stop until we found his son. And I thought, because he's a U.S. citizen, I can make this work. But DOJ came clear to me and they said, "No, this is a Haitian crime. There's nothing, you got to come back." But I'd already promised the father, right? So, and I did the same thing in Colombia. I went too far in a case where we were set up to do a big takedown, rescue over 100 kids. But again, I overcommitted and we didn't have the mandate to be there. So then it was, now what? I'm 12 years in this job as an undercover operator for the U.S. government. And I went back to my wife and I said, what do we do? I can't work these cases anymore. And it was my wife. It's always my wife, by the way, who directs me. And none of this would have happened without her. She says, well, it's very simple. You have to quit your job and we'll just figure it out. So we went down and we quit. We started this foundation. I pulled in a kind of a coalition of willing people who would work for free because I didn't have enough money. Former Navy SEALs, guys I knew in the government who came in, former FBI, Homeland Security guys, local cops. And we went down and we were successful. We went in Colombia and rescued over 100 kids.
Wow. I want to ask the question, when you say I know you're oversimplifying. You went down there, we liberated them, right?
Yeah.
That sounds super easy, like you pressed a button and
Yeah.
it's not pressing a button.
No, it's not.
What does that take? Who are the people? Because you've assembled this team. Now you're on your own. You don't have government support, right? Who is around you? Who are you? Are you working with the government in Colombia? Who are the men that are going in and busting down doors? What does it take?
Yes, excellent question. So yes, we always work with government or we won't work at all. So we basically become consultants for the government and they'll sign us up as informants, officially, legitimately as informants that allow us to legally then go undercover on behalf of the government. And so the Haitian government volunteered me to go undercover and just walk into this place.
You just walked in.
Just walked in.
Blind, walked in, didn't know what you were walking
That's
into,
right.
if you were going to get killed.
That's right, because we had no other option. We couldn't get any more intel except that someone went in. And being an American, I would have more ability to kind of trick them, right? Because I don't look like I work for the Haitian police.
No.
So we wired me up, cameras and glasses, cameras in backpacks, hidden cameras. And I walk into this place and it was probably the most emotional moment I had in my career at that point. Because I walk in, I see these kids, and there's 28 children. The youngest is 1, the oldest is like 13. And they're just miserable. And I know what's going on. Like I can tell. And the people came up to me immediately and they said, oh, you must have heard what we do here. I said, yeah, of course. That's why I'm here. Okay. So the kids are $10,000 each. Just like that.
Instantly.
And so we start negotiating and I'm looking for little Gardy. I'm just dying. I'm just like, where is he? I can't tell. There's these dark outbuildings around him. And so I want to get into those. So the police had told me, because again, we work under their jurisdiction, if you can't find Gardy and they offer to sell you a child, buy the child. Go through with the deal. Let them conclude this deal, which will give us the evidence we need to then take this place down. And then we'll really be able to find Gardy. So at this point, I have to pick a child to buy in a sting operation. And I'm looking around as I'm looking for this kid, who am I going to buy? And this beautiful little boy, he's about probably 2 years old. He basically picks me and he walks up to me and I just hold this little boy in my arms. And I said, okay, he's the one I'm going to buy. I take him in my arms and I walk into some of the outbuildings while my colleague is keeping the traffickers occupied, negotiating a price and so forth. And so I'm looking in, I got my camera to pick up any other faces, any other children. And as I'm walking into this dark outbuilding on this premises, this dirty, smelly, evil place, I hear the footsteps of another child who's following me. And I swing around and there's this 3-year-old girl. And I'll tell you in a minute why I'm getting so emotional. There's a reason. And she's looking at me and she's looking at him, and I want to kind of get her out of the way. I don't want to create, a lot of attention around what I'm doing. So I give her a candy bar. Now these kids are all, we find out later, and I could tell in the moment, all of them are on the verge of starvation. She's probably never seen a candy bar. And I said, take this outside, you can eat it outside. And I have children, I know they respond to that. This little girl did something I'd never seen any child do. She took the candy bar, she broke it in half, almost like muscle memory, not even thinking, without taking her eyes off the little boy in my arms, breaks that candy bar in half and hands the other half to the little boy. And I just knew, God told me in that moment.
They're related.
They're brother and sister.
Wow.
All they have is each other. That's it. And what have I done? How many Americans have come down to this place, picked up a child, and that child disappears forever, and this little girl's not going to let that happen. And so I broke the cardinal rule of undercover operators in that moment, this first and last time I ever did it, I broke this rule by telling them who I was, that I am here to help them and that they need to help me and just go along with what I'm doing and we will get you guys out of here. And she knew this girl's brilliant. She's gifted in a way that most children aren't. And so she does, and she goes along with this. We end up getting the kids out. We buy those kids in a sting operation, in a sting deal. We had to go to another hotel that we had set up where we had cameras wired to make sure we got all the dialogue and all the evidence we needed. It went off perfectly. The traffickers got arrested. They liberated the orphanage, the false orphanage. And little Gardy, of course, wasn't there. But the father, I told you about the father of this little boy who I met, who I made the promise to, that we would never, he's a pastor of his congregation, of his Christian church. I promised him that we would never stop till we found his son. He's waiting in another hotel for the good news. He's waiting for me to walk through the door with his son in my arms. And we all knew that was going to happen. We believed it. And I still had hope at this moment when the police raided the front orphanage that Gardy would be there. And about 30 minutes later, they called me with the devastating news that he's not here. We got 28 kids, but we didn't get him. And I had to go back and tell this man what happened. And it was the most difficult and most inspiring conversation I've ever had with a human being. I went back, sat down with him. He was in the lobby of the hotel, and without saying a word, he just breaks down. I break down. We're just sobbing without even exchanging any words because he knew that I didn't have his son. Yeah. But I did eke out the words to him. But we did get 28 kids out. And then he did this most amazing thing. He slaps his hand on the table and he pops his head up and his tears are drying. I'm still crying. He's not. And he says, "Stop crying. This is amazing." I said, "What's amazing?" He said, "You just told me we rescued 28 kids." I said, "Yeah, but I'm worried about the one we didn't get." And he says, "No, you're missing it. If Gardy hadn't been kidnapped, none of those kids would have had a chance. His kidnapping led to this." And I thought, wow, I couldn't say what you're saying were roles reversed. And then he said this, the most profound thing anyone's ever said to me. He said, "If I have to give up my son so that those 28 kids could be rescued, then that is a burden I'm willing to bear."
Wow.
And we've rescued over 3,000 victims and children since that time. And they're all because of this sacrifice. So back to those two little kids. So I go home that night and I'm just an emotional mess. Just like I'm happy and I'm sad and I'm bewildered by this man. He in fact went to the police right after that. I went with him and he said, "If you can't find parents for these children who were rescued in the name of my son, I will bring them home." He went home with 8 of those 28 kids.
Oh my goodness.
Unbelievable. So I go call my wife that night from this crappy, Haitian hotel room. I remember there's rats running around. That's all we could afford at the time. We were like piled up, like 10 of us in a room. And I couldn't sleep. And I told her the story. I said, "Can you believe this?" And I said, "I want to be like him. Like Gesno Marty, that's his name." And she said, and I got to be careful what I say to my wife because when she says something, I know it's inspired, especially, when she says it that way. And she did one of those on the phone and she said, "Well, let's be like him. I want to be the mother of those 2 children that you had to buy, that you bonded with. I want to be their mom. Will you make that happen for me?" And I was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like, we have no money. I just left my secure job to start a nonprofit." But I knew that she felt it and we did it. And those kids have been home for 2 years now.
Oh my goodness. That is such an incredible story.
So we have 7 of our own. So that made 9.
You have 9 children.
We have 9. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just doing the God's work. I mean, that really is God's work. And I really want to just add some, not credit, but just to sort of speak about what your wife was experiencing and what she's feeling. Because as soon as you said, "Oh, honey, they had me on sex trafficking," and her initial response, that would have been my initial response. Because it's a topic that no one wants to talk about. And it's because it actually so deeply affects us that we want to pretend that it's not happening. And the courage, for her to say, "This is exactly why we should do it." And I can't imagine, how it impacts, just your emotionality every single day. There's no way you cannot just leave the office, right? No. There's no such thing as leaving your work at home because you're seeing something that is just just tethers you to your humanity and makes you realize that there are just some really, really, really wrong things about this world.
That's right.
Really horrible things about this world. And I'm guilty of it too. You know, I try to like, you know, you want to turn the faucet off on certain types of evil because you just can't stomach it. And talking about this issue in particular is really hard for people. And I think that's really why so many of us are ignorant about just how extensive the issue really is.